offering each other a sign of peace. In Ukraine, they were hoping for a miracle, a ceasefire with no conditions. Could the power of prayer silence the guns? Maybe, just maybe, this picture could make you believe that anything is possible. Still, not everybody's joining in the ritual. And frankly, it's not always easy to love thy neighbour, especially if he keeps parking his tanks on your lawn. Back home, ahead of crucial local elections in England, we'll be joined by the leader of the opposition and the Conservatives, Kemi Badenoch. For the government, we'll speak to the Cabinet Office Minister, Pat McFadden. And we'll try to work out whether Donald Trump can get a deal to end the Ukraine war and what he'll do if he can't, with former Deputy US National Security Advisor Ben Rhodes. Plus, with us throughout the show, the author and broadcaster Ian Dale, the broadcaster Carolyn Quinn, and author and journalist Paul Mason. Here we go. Welcome to Sunday Morning with Trevor Phillips. Maybe after that angry confrontation in the Oval Office, both President Trump and President Zelensky took to reading the Bible, particularly the book of Proverbs, chapter 15, verse 1. A soft answer turneth away wrath. Still, the Russian wolf, in the Bible it's a wolf, not a lion, doesn't quite seem ready to lie down with the Ukrainian lamb. As a result, the American president last night seemed to be signalling that he's had enough of the Kremlin's foot-dragging, telling Mr. Putin that he'd better get on with making a peace deal or else. Or else what, we're not entirely sure, but there's definitely a change of tone from the White House. And while he's studying Proverbs, Mr. Trump might also want to take note of verse 27, which begins, "He that is greedy of gain troubleth his own house." The president says he wants to make Americans rich again, yet almost 100 days into his second presidency, every major stock exchange is down. Politically, with elections in Canada and Australia due tomorrow and Saturday, the polls suggest that the Trump effect abroad has been to undermine his own allies on the right of politics. Oddly, the only big Western country where that is not true is Britain. All the signs being that Nigel Farage's Reform Party is heading for a good night in our local elections this Thursday. Over the next 90 minutes, we'll try to work out why. Let's start this morning with the government. I can speak now to the Cabinet Office Minister, Pat McFadden. Good morning, Mr. McFadden.
Good morning.
The Prime Minister saw both President Trump and President Zelensky yesterday. How close do you think we are to a deal that could stop the fighting?
Well, I think it was a very powerful picture that we saw yesterday at the Pope's funeral. That picture of President Trump and President Zelensky speaking together in private, no one else around them. What a contrast to the scene that we saw in the Oval Office a couple of months ago. So I think that's encouraging. Everybody wants this war to end. But what's really important is not just a stop to the fighting, but an end to the war that results in a lasting peace and stops a situation where President Putin can just start up again in a year, in 2 years, or some other time of his choosing. And that, I think, is what the Ukrainian leader will want more than anything. Not just an end to the fighting, but a secure and lasting peace.
Well, that of course describes everybody's ambition, but the question is, we're good at pictures, but what about the action? The President said yesterday that there was no reason, this is President Trump, there's no reason for Putin to be shooting missiles into civilian areas, cities and towns over the last few days. Makes me think that maybe he doesn't want to stop the war. He's just tapping me along, and that has to be dealt with differently. Do you think that there is a change of mind in the White House?
Well, those words speak for themselves. There's certainly no reason for President Putin to be ordering strikes on civilian areas in Ukraine. There's no reason for President Putin to have invaded Ukraine in the first place. This is a war of aggression on Russia's part. And I think in the UK we've recognised that all along. So what's really important is that if we do get to a cessation of hostilities, that Ukraine has some security about its future. And that's what's been at the top of the Prime Minister's agenda in all the work that he's done with President Trump and with European leaders in recent months.
But I think what we're trying to understand is whether the key player here, the United States, where its mind is at. Ben Rhodes, the former Deputy National Security Advisor under Obama, has told us that he thought that Donald Trump has just simply realised what the rest of the world already knew. Do you agree?
Well, look, you know, I don't want to comment on every twist and turn coming out of
well, there's not every twist and turn. This is quite a big deal.
If
he has actually changed his mind, it's quite a big deal. You can't be neutral about it.
Well, certainly the tone that was adopted yesterday in terms of recognising the consequences of Russian aggression was right, it was welcome. This is a war of Russian aggression. So I hope that President Trump and his administration can bring the parties together in a way that stops the fighting and gets a lasting peace. From a European point of view, from a United Kingdom point of view, we have seen from day one that this is a war of Russian aggression, and that's why this concept of security after the fighting stops is so important, because it isn't really secure if we just have a stop to the fighting and then President Putin can wake up one day and just start all over again. We don't want that to happen, and that's why it's got to be a secure and lasting peace.
Well, we can obviously have our views about what happens after the fighting stops, but we've got to get to that point first, haven't we? Do you envisage, as a government, that there may come a point where there is some kind of land for peace deal in which the Ukrainians simply have to surrender territory?
Well, this is for Ukraine to decide, not for the UK government to decide if that's on the table. I think you've seen from some of the comments coming out of Ukraine in recent days, there may be debate about that. But from our point of view...
You're talking about Mr Klitschko, the mayor of Kyiv, saying that there could be a land for peace deal.
That's right, in the interview that he gave a couple of days ago. From our point of view, this is for Ukraine to decide. It's not for the UK to dictate. And that's why all along we've been saying you can't have a peace about Ukraine without Ukraine being at the table. They've got to be the people who are there and making the decisions about the terms of any peace deal in the future. And that's always been very clear to us. All
right. The United States has imposed its tariffs. We've got a 90-day pause. How close are we to a trade deal with America?
Well, there's a serious level of engagement going on at high levels in the administration. We're taking it seriously. I think the United States are taking it seriously too. So I think an agreement is possible. I don't think it's certain, and I don't want to say it's certain, but I think it's possible. We're talking to one another. We want an agreement that's in the UK's interest. Far better to have the right agreement than to rush and have a hasty agreement for the sake of having one. This has got to be something that's in the UK's interests. The United States is a really important trading partner, a really important ally. We'll keep working with the United States and keep trying to get to an agreement in the coming weeks. Certainly possible.
In the coming weeks? That's interesting. I know if I ask you what the sticking points are, you're not going to tell me. But let's just at least deal with timing, because what businesses want to know is when can they have some degree of certainty? Are we talking weeks rather than months?
Well, look, we're working very hard on this. As I said, there's a serious level of engagement. I don't want to put a date on it because it's an unpredictable world, as you may have noticed, and lots of things can happen. But I see no reason why, there's no fundamental reason why we can't reach a good agreement with the United States that serves the interests of both the UK and the US very well.
I'm not asking you to put a date on it, but, you know, these things could be days or they could be years. And I think it's helpful to know what order of time we're talking about. Are we talking about weeks or months or next year? What's your guess?
Well, look, I think if it's years in the distance, people will lose interest in it. You know, the question is whether we can get this done in a reasonable time frame. I don't really want to go further than that today because it is an unpredictable world. But the important thing for you and your viewers, Trevor, is I don't want people to think this has completely gone off the boil since those tariffs were announced by President Trump a few weeks ago. That's not the case. There has been dialogue between the UK and the US since then. It's a good dialogue. That dialogue continues. I'm hopeful we can reach agreement, but it will have to be an agreement that's in the UK's interest.
Okay.
We're not going to sign something just for the sake of having a signing ceremony. That's really important for our economic interests and for living standards and for business interests in our own country.
Your negotiators have been rather busy. They've also been talking to the EU. How close are we to a new trade deal with the EU?
Well, we think we can improve upon the agreement that Boris Johnson struck a few years ago. That agreement has caused an awful lot of bureaucracy and costs here in the UK, costs for the public sector. I see that myself as a minister overall in charge of the civil service, but also costs for the private sector. So my colleague Nick Thomas-Symonds, the Cabinet Office Minister, is doing a fantastic job on this. He is leading these discussions, and what's first and foremost on our agenda is getting a food and agriculture and a veterinary agreement because that's such an important area for the UK and an area where we've had so much extra cost and bureaucracy because of Brexit. And you might have noticed a letter from some of the major food retailers in recent days urging us on, trying to get that food and agriculture agreement. So we're working very hard on that. But again, as with the United States, there's no point in calling the game before it's done. We've still got work to do, and we're doing that work with our partners in the EU.
OK, give us a clue. Weeks or months?
Well, we have a summit coming up in a few weeks. We'll see how much progress we've made by then. But again, it is possible to do two things at once. And we are talking to the European Union about improved trade relations as well as the United States. And there's a bigger point here, Trevor, about the nature of the UK economy. We are not an economy where our trade policy can be based on we don't like you and we don't like you and we'll not talk to you. For an open trading economy like the United Kingdom, we have to have a good trading relationship with the EU and with the US and with other parts of the world too. That's the nature of our economy.
OK.
And it's in the interests of the British public that we do that.
Well, Mr McFadden, we're all pretty well aware that your government, particularly you, can walk and chew gum at the same time, but you can't walk in two different directions at the same time. And you're going to have to choose, aren't you, at some point, between a deal which satisfies everything that the United States wants, historically, for example, chlorine-washed chicken onto our tables, and some of the things that the EU wants, what they call farm to fork, which excludes chlorine-washed chickens. In reality, you are going to have to choose, it sounds like, within weeks, which is our priority, the EU or the United States.
Well, on that particular issue, we've made clear we will not water down our animal welfare standards with either party. Actually, our animal welfare standards are important to us. They're important to our farmers. They're important to the British public. We're not going to water down our standards here. But I don't agree that it's some fundamental choice beyond that where we have to pick one trading partner rather than another. I think that's to misunderstand the nature of the UK economy. And I don't think it would be in our interests to put all our eggs in one basket. We've got to be open to trading with all parts of the world. That's what's in our interests, and that is the goal that the UK government will pursue.
OK, I just want to move on to politics, but just very quickly, is a youth mobility scheme, whatever you call it, the opportunity for young people to come and go here and the EU. Is that part of the conversation that's going on with the EU?
Look, there'll be all sorts of speculation. Is this part of the conversation? Is that part of the conversation?
No, I'm not speculating. I'm just asking whether it's there or not.
Look, let's see what's agreed at the end of the day. I don't think it's helpful for me or other ministers to negotiate by interview. My colleague Nick Thomas-Symonds is doing a very good job on this, and I'm sure that he will pursue an agreement that's in the country's interest. As I said, top of the agenda is less bureaucracy and less cost for our businesses in exporting fantastic British food and drink. That's in all our interest. That's what we want to do.
This is a very interesting response, Mr. McFadden, because we haven't got time for me to play you the clip, but a few months ago, your colleague Yvette Cooper said, no, we're not interested in the youth mobility scheme. You seem to be saying, could happen.
Look, we said some things in our manifesto about not rerunning the Brexit debate. We stick by them. There won't be a return to the kind of free movement that we had before we left the EU. We're not going to rejoin the single market and the customs union. Those things remain, but within those things that we said, we think we can get a better deal for the country than Boris Johnson's deal. I don't even think the people who signed that deal think it's a good deal. It's left to us to improve it, and that's what we'll try and do.
All right, democracy bites this week. What will be a good night for Labour in the local elections on Thursday?
Well, I ran our general election campaign last year, Trevor, and it resulted in a big majority for us. And before that, I never walked around talking our own book and saying we'd win this or we'd win that. And, you know, my approach has always been, the great thing about a democracy is the voters will decide. Look, these local elections are not in areas of traditional Labour strength. I think we only control one of the areas that's up for election on Thursday, and that's after years of gaining seats in opposition. So I'm not predicting huge Labour gains on Thursday. What I think will be very interesting is this existential struggle that's going on between the Tories and Reform, where
I want to come to that,
Tories
but before
don't seem to know
before we get on
whether
to
they
other
want
people's
to
troubles,
fight Reform or become Reform.
Before we get on to other people's troubles, can we just deal with the fact that right now, you won't be able to see this, but you know this, the latest polls put you behind Reform. And even if they don't do as well as they hope, all the predictions are that there will be an increase in the number of councils that are under no overall control. And historically, the way we deal with that is by coalitions. Will you forbid your councillors to go into coalition with Reform, if that's how the arithmetic falls?
Yeah, we won't go into coalition. We won't. The deals on offer after Thursday won't be between Labour and the Tories and Labour and Reform. But what there's been a lot of debate about is what's going to happen between the Tories and Reform, because I'm not even sure if they're two different parties or one party at the moment. It is quite interesting to me watching the Tory party having this existential crisis in public about whether they're even going to continue as a party that aims to get a majority on its own. That's not a matter for me, it's a matter for them. I can tell you Labour will keep fighting. I know you like to spend a lot of time talking about the Tories, but I'm really interested in you. You're such an interesting person. I want to talk about you. How concerned are you about the fall-off in enthusiasm for the two historic great parties, Conservatives and Labour? You're now, between you, down to less than 45% of the vote, and that is historic. I mean, that hasn't happened for more than, well, a century, more than time the Labour Party's been in existence. Look, we had some tough stuff to sort out after the election last year, and I accept that some of those decisions have not been the most popular, but we are starting to see things turn around now. We've had a fall in NHS waiting lists for 6 months in a row. The waiting list come down by over 200,000. Very interestingly, it's come down by 50,000 in areas of the highest need, where We're not just trying to get people off the waiting list, but get them into work too. We've got the new diagnostic centres out, 4.5 million new diagnostic tests. That's up 50% on the same period last year. So we're starting to turn things round, but it will take some time to feel the benefit of these things. And a year in, we know we've got more to do because people want to see delivery. They want to see a Labour government turn around the NHS. We will do that, and it's a big contrast to what we inherited with the NHS, or indeed another force on the right that doesn't believe in the NHS at all.
Is it fair to interpret what you're telling me? There are green shoots for Labour?
I'd say we're starting to turn things round, not just in health. We've got 2,000 more teachers in training. We've opened the first 750 breakfast clubs. More to do, though. Much more to do, and that's what we want to get on with.
Pat McFadden, thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thank you very much.
Well, let's see what our panel made of all that. We're joined all morning by the author and broadcaster Ian Dale, the broadcaster Carolyn Quinn, and the author and journalist Paul Mason. Ian, he seems remarkably chipper for a man whose party has fallen behind reform.
I don't know if you're a fan of cricket, Trevor, but that was a classic Chris Taveray straight bat performance, wasn't it?
The most boring opener ever to hit English cricket.
I mean, he talks a good game, but I mean,
He's
really
not boring.
he didn't give you anything there, did he? In terms of detail about the trade talks, I'm not sure you were expecting him to. I thought actually the local election stuff was the most interesting, because what he really should fear is a Tory reform sort of coalition deal. Because if you look at the opinion polls, together they have 45% of the vote, and Labour has 23%. Now, I don't think there is going to be any sort of form of national coalition between the two, but if there were, Labour should be really worried.
I want to come back to talk about that, but we'll talk to the leader of the Conservative Party about exactly that point. But, Carolyn, do you think they're bracing themselves for a bad night?
I think they probably are, because they know that they've got a by-election, that all the predictions are that they will lose that to reform. There are a number of other seats around. Of course, these aren't seats where Labour feels confident about winning them, and they are in the first throes of being a rather unpopular new-ish government. So I think that they're downplaying expectations now. And of course, you know, these aren't areas that they would naturally have hopes of winning. I think they are doing exactly what the Conservatives are trying to do, which is downplay expectations. What I thought was really interesting with that was Pat McFadden seemed on very, very safe territory when he was attacking the Conservatives and reform. But when you talk to him about the potential for a trade deal with the EU versus, or as well as, a trade deal with the US, my goodness, he was illustrative there of cabinet ministers having to tread so carefully on that tightrope. You know, shall I add the illusion, carrying a Ming vase as well, trying to sort of find a way between the two, insisting that they can both work together. But of course, if agreements are made with the EU over things like food standards, carbon taxes, will the US accept that? It's a really, really difficult conundrum, and you could see that exactly with Pat McFadden's answers to you.
This is a lot of your territory, Paul, as an economist. What did you make of what Pat McFadden said? I mean, he rather blithely said, you know, these things are complicated and we can walk and chew gum and all that.
Look, if we end up with a decent trade deal with the USA and get ourselves off the torture rack of sanctions, tariffs, which may come back, and if at the same time this conversation between Zelensky and Trump leads to a tougher approach by Trump, and we actually see some pushback against Putin, I think we would have to say that those were achievements for Starmer's government, because Keir Starmer, in fact, the whole front bench are spending a lot of time trying to deal with the fallout of America's sudden mercurial explosion. It's limiting their bandwidth for domestic politics, unfortunately, but I think we should give them the credit for that. Where I don't give my fellow Labour Party member credit for Pat there, or whoever sent him out, is that even in elections like these, which they're clearly not putting a lot of effort into, let's be clear, they're not putting in a ton of effort, you've got to spend every second on the airwaves making the case, the positive case, not for we've done this, for what your vision is, what your vision for the future of this country is, because that's what you're up against with Nigel Farage. He has a very clearly reactionary, pro-Trump vision for this country. We, the left, have an equally strong vision. And I want to see my party get out there and fight for that, not simply sort of a list of things they've managed to tick this week, which are all incremental and people aren't feeling.
There's a case for as steady as she goes, though, isn't it, Carolyn? You know.
Well, I think possibly. And the Labour government will say, look, we have plans for the future. We have a long-term ambition for the economy. OK, things are a bit rocky now, but look at what we're doing about planning and house building, etc., looking into the future and doing what often governments get criticised for, which is not long-term. But facing them on Thursday are these elections. And whatever the predictions are and however much they're downplaying their expectations, Nigel Farage and Reform have their tails up. He is very, very good at exploiting grievances, isn't he? And he has his tanks on Labour lawns. We've seen how he started to talk to trade unions and got involved in the British Steel situation. So, you know, they have somebody on their backs.
Coming back to this point, in a way, about where Reform sits relative to the conventional parties. So we can see they are actually... the combined vote for Labour and Tory has declined. And Labour wants to paint Reform as just another version of the Conservative Party. But there's another story going on here, isn't there, Ian, which is the insurgency. Because actually we're seeing that the Greens are holding their numbers, Lib Dems are doing pretty well. That actually there's a problem here for the conventional duopoly.
Yeah, but there's also a problem for the conventional sort of splinter opposition parties too, because back in the 80s, 90s, the Liberals, or Liberal Democrats, as they then became, were seen as the repository of the dustbin vote, sort of a plague on all of your houses. We don't like Conservative, we don't like Labour, so the only alternative was to vote Liberal Democrat. Now there are three alternatives. So if you are a left-wing voter, there are things in the Reform policy platform which you might like, but there's also the Greens and the Lib Dems. That's why they've held up comparatively well in all of the polls at the moment. I mean, the Greens, for example, I mean, they're pushing 10%. Now, in local elections, over the last few years, they have done comparatively well, so they will be expecting to make a lot of gains. The Liberal Democrats in Conservative-facing councils, and most of them are, if you look at the numbers of seats being defended, the Conservatives are defending 996 seats, Labour 287, Liberal Democrats 207. So inevitably, it's going to be a bad night for the Conservatives. I mean, Labour, I'm not sure, will go down. In fact, I think Labour could gain some seats on Thursday. But the Liberal Democrats and Greens, they will see this as bigger opportunity as Reform do.
And the Conservatives, of course, you know, these seats were last fought in 2021, the height of the vaccine bounce, Boris Johnson incredibly popular at that point. So the only way is down, really, for Conservatives. And as you say, you know, they have got many more seats to defend than Labour, you know, 1,000 against 300 or so. So, you know, it's a different story for the Conservatives.
It sounds weird, but if the Conservatives can restrict their losses to, say, 200, I think they'll have thought they've done quite well.
Well, we'll ask the leader. What do you think, Paul? Is there anything very much either way for Labour this Thursday?
Well, I think Runcorn is a challenge,
right?
And I think Doncaster, the Doncaster area, will be watching that very, very carefully. But the point is how they react to it, how they react to what will inevitably be seen as a validation of Reform's surge. For me, they have to react to it by revitalising this government. It has to start doing new things, it has to start communicating new messages, and it has to get its attention away from the international to the high street, to the local NHS, to the school gate, and to the workplace, because that's where the people who love the Labour Party, it's still 20-odd% people, despite everything, voting for them. That's why they love it. That's what they want to see Keir Starmer do. And I hope after this is over, we will see a bit more revitalisation.
But you're talking about appealing to the core Labour vote. Surely Labour have got to appeal to outside that.
They have to do, and Reform's vote is very much a mixture of ex-Tory and ex-Labour, and we have some people to get from that.
It is coming up to 9 o'clock. You're watching Sunday Morning with Trevor Phillips. In the last hour, the Cabinet Office Minister, Pat McFadden, has told this programme he thinks that yesterday's Trump-Zelensky meeting is encouraging. He said that talks are ongoing on trade deals with both the United States and the EU, and that both were possible. Lots to come this morning. Any moment now, we'll speak live to the Leader of the Opposition, Conservative Party leader Kemi Badenoch. We'll also preview what's at stake in Thursday's local elections with the veteran political journalist and pollster Peter Kellner. And following talks in the Vatican that both Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky have lauded, what next for the war in Ukraine? Shortly, we'll hear from Ben Rhodes, who was Deputy National Security Advisor to President Obama. Well, this week's local elections could be a bruising affair for the Conservatives. Last time these seats were contested, they were riding high. They won big. Now, with the threat of reform, they're likely to lose a lot of councillors. On the national stage, most polls now show them in third place behind Nigel Farage's party and Labour. Well, I can now speak to the Conservative leader, Kemi Badenoch. Good morning.
Good morning, Trevor.
Let's start with Ukraine. What do you make of President Trump's message yesterday that maybe he, Putin, doesn't want to stop the war? He's just tapping me along.
Well, I think this is definitely a sign of progress. It's a positive signal. I have always said that President Zelensky was the hero in this war. Putin is the aggressor, and for those of us who believe in freedom, we should not allow the aggressor to win. Certainly not someone like Putin, who doesn't want to see freedom in Russia or Ukraine.
And have you then thought that, alongside that Mr. Trump, who plainly favoured the claims, as it were, of the Russians, was just wrong in his strategy?
Well, I think what we saw was President Trump trying to bring the war to an end in the fastest way possible. But
Was that a mistake?
Yeah, but I've been very clear that the strategy the UK had when we were in government, the strategy that Boris Johnson had, was to make sure that Ukraine didn't lose any further territory. It had to be a war that Russia stopped, not one that Ukraine surrendered. And it's interesting, I believe he said that it looks like Russia's been stringing him along, or words to that effect. And if that is the case, then this is a very positive signal, and we welcome it. And it was really heartening to see him talking to President Zelensky in the Vatican yesterday after that really awful press conference where Zelensky was humiliated. I think we should all be pleased to see these positive signals.
Can you envisage a land for peace deal in which Ukraine surrenders some of its land? I mean, would that be something that you would support, or would you feel that's just an outrage rewarding aggression?
It would be rewarding aggression. And we all need to remember that Ukraine is fighting a war on Europe's behalf. Russia is not an ally, Ukraine is. Remember what happened in Salisbury, poisoning people on our soil. That's what Russia does. So Ukraine losing this war is a very bad sign. It's a weakening for Europe. We want Ukraine to have its territorial integrity
So from
preserved.
your point of view, no surrender?
There should not be. No, there should not be. We need to do everything we can to support Ukraine, and that's going to need the US's support, which is why I really welcome these positive signals that we've seen from President Trump.
Let's talk about the job you used to do, or the issues that concern the job you used to do, Trade Secretary. We don't know how close UK and the United States are to a trade deal, though Pat McFadden talked essentially about weeks. If the government came to Parliament and said, we think that we've got a deal with the United States, but by the way, it involves us accepting some things that the EU might not like. I think chlorinated chicken, for example. Would the fact that it might make a deal with the EU less likely give you pause for thought about backing a deal?
So let me first of all start by saying that they should be close to closing this, because we got very close last time President Trump was in office. So this is something which we've negotiated. Let's see where they get to. When it comes to things like chlorinated chicken, we have high food standards in this country. When I was Trade Secretary, I didn't do a deal with Canada. Lots of people criticised me for it. Canada wanted us to water down our food standards. for these same issues, hormone-treated beef, etc. And I said no. So Labour should not be doing that. And it's not about the EU. It's about making sure that we have high standards in this country and we have a level playing field.
But the EU standard would preclude some kinds of deals with the United States, wouldn't they?
We have that's not quite how trade agreements work. What you let into your country is what you let into your country. We're not in the EU anymore. We have a free trade agreement with the EU. We want to see a free trade agreement with the US. What Labour needs to do now is show that they can get a deal that isn't making concessions so we can have what we had last month before the trade tariffs. And we need serious people doing this. What I have seen so far is that whenever Labour negotiates, Britain loses. Whether with the Chagos Islands or with the unions, they always go in surrendering everything and then hoping the other side will be nice to them. And you look at who is doing the negotiations, a business secretary who's never run a business, never, as far as I can tell, worked in a business, can't find his solicitor regulations, only just discovered that he's not a lawyer. That's who's doing our negotiating. And that's what worries me. So I'm hopeful, but I'm not optimistic about Labour's ability to negotiate.
This is very interesting. You're attacking the business secretary.
And she's business and trade secretary, yes, he is.
On his qualifications. This morning, you accused the Prime Minister personally of cowardice, I'm quoting here, having no moral core, twisting in the wind, thinking he's too clever to be held to account. Is this the way you're going to fight the rest of the election campaign? It's not very elevated, is it?
I'm going to speak the truth. When the Prime Minister is at PMQs and he's being rude and dismissive, you don't ask him whether that's the way he's going to conduct himself.
But you don't like it when he has a go at you because of you.
I don't. People can have a go at me for whatever reason. I will speak the truth. And what I saw last Wednesday was a man who refused to apologise or even acknowledge that any wrong had been done to a woman who was hounded out of their party because she said biological sex.
This is the Canterbury MP, Rosie Duffield, you're talking about.
That's right.
Have you come to conclude, a casual reader would say that you actually dislike the Prime Minister?
No, I don't dislike him. I dislike his politics, and I dislike the fact that there's no conviction in anything that he does. How can we have a Prime Minister who doesn't know what a woman is until the Supreme Court tells him? What does he know about the economy then? What's he going to do about foreign affairs? We've just been talking about Trump and Zelensky. If someone is too afraid to say what they think because they're afraid of what the media will say or what others will say, then how can they lead the country? And the reason why I'm so vocal on this issue is because I took a lot of abuse from Labour MPs, calling me a homophobe, a transphobe for saying what the Supreme Court has just ruled. So I don't have any sympathy for them feeling that they're getting opprobrium. They just have to deal with it. Politics is about making difficult decisions, and they need to grow up and be honest about what it is they believe in.
Yes, this may sound like a sort of tiny difference, but actually you will know it's quite a big difference. It's one thing to say that your opponent's act is cowardly. It's another thing to say the person who's facing you is a coward. And what you're saying this morning is that this man is a coward. He has no moral core. He twists in the wind. He thinks he's too clever, i.e. he's too arrogant. How can you say you like such a person? That is personal.
This is politics. I'm saying what I see. I don't have many interactions with him outside PMQs. I will say what I see. My job is to be the leader of the opposition, to hold the government to account. I speak for all of those people out there in the country who are feeling the pain of Labour's decisions, and they've been getting things consistently wrong. This week, I was on 2 farms listening to farmers talking about how their lives are being destroyed. We're talking about chlorinated chicken. The biggest thing that's going to destroy farming in this country is the family farms tax. Labour has done that, been unapologetic. It's not my job to like the Prime Minister. It's my job to speak for all those people out there who want their voices heard. OK, well, all those people out there are going to have their voices heard on Thursday. And last time we spoke, you accepted that you were in for a spanking. Is that still your expectation? I did not use that term, Trevor. Those are your words, not mine. I said it's going to be extremely challenging. But we have to remember, next week's elections are not an opinion poll. They are about who's going to be running adult social care, who's going to be fixing roads, looking after children with special educational needs. And across the board, Conservative councils deliver better services for lower taxes. You only need to look at Birmingham and see what's happening there, rubbish piled up in the streets, rats running around. That's what you get when you treat politics as an opinion poll. We mustn't get into any individual authorities, but we get your point. Put a number on it.
What's a good night for the Tories?
I'm not putting a number on it. People ask me this all the time. I'm not playing guess the number. What I want to see is the hard work of Conservative councillors across the country rewarded. They do a very difficult job. They've managed under very tight finances. Conservative councils are not the ones that are going, losing money, going bankrupt. They keep the council tax low, unlike Labour, who promised to freeze council tax and have been raising it.
Look, what councils are going to need, especially with tariffs and this and uncertainties, is a stable administration. In many places, we know that there will be no overall control of councils, and typically what happens there is there are coalitions, and people in your party have been in coalitions with others. Will you forbid your councillors to go into a coalition with Reform?
OK. So I want to be extremely clear, because people have often been confused by this. I am not going into any coalition whatsoever with Nigel Farage or Reform at national level. I've been very
under
clear
any
about
circumstances.
That. I have said, read my lips, Trevor. I am not going into coalition with Nigel Farage.
Under any circumstances.
At local level.
Under any circumstances.
I will repeat myself. I am not going into any coalition with Nigel Farage. At local level, it's different. In the national election, you can rerun the election. At local level, you can't. So there might be no overall control. And what I've said to our councillors, I trust these people. They're very smart. They've been doing this for decades, is that you have to do what is right for your local area. You look, at the moment, we are in coalition with Liberal Democrats, with Independents. We've been in coalition with Labour before at local government level. They have to look at who the people are that they're going into coalition with and seeing how they can deliver for local people. So, what I don't want to hear is talks of stitch-ups or people planning things before the result is out. So they have to do what's right for their community.
So if the numbers work out this way in a particular area on Friday morning, you're not going to say to any of your local council leaders, you may not work with Nigel Farage's party?
A lot of the people who are in Reform now are defected Conservative councillors. So they probably worked with some of those people before. This is why I say they need to make that decision themselves. I wouldn't recommend going into coalition with people who are not credible, people who have no agenda, no manifesto. We need to make sure that we're delivering the services, picking up the rubbish, filling the potholes, looking after adult social care, running schools. That's their job.
OK, so people who are going to vote, who want to vote Conservative, know that the outcome might be a coalition with Reform, if that's the way it falls. But one thing that's interesting, I mean, you haven't been shy to, as we've discussed...
You know I'm not shy.
You're not shy. You haven't been shy to express your views about the personal characteristics and capabilities of the Prime Minister. The TUC boss Paul Novak says this morning that Nigel Farage is, I'm quoting him here, a political fraud and a hypocrite, cosplaying as a champion of the working class. Would you endorse that message?
So it's not for me to speak for the TUC or endorse them. I've been very clear that Nigel Farage wants to destroy the Conservative Party. He said so himself. This is one of the greatest institutions of our country, I firmly believe. He is not someone that I'm interested in doing business with. And he's already lost 20% of his party. Rupert Lowe himself, someone who came in wanting to make Farage Prime Minister, says that man must not be Prime Minister. So let the people who've worked with him speak for him. I'm here to speak for the Conservative Party. We are the only credible party right now that's standing for local government. We know that people
You're happy to talk about the Prime Minister's character, but you're not so keen to talk about Farage's
that's because
character.
I'm the leader of the opposition, not the opposition to Reform, the opposition to the government.
Oh,
that is the job that I have been given. I don't want to spend all my time talking about all the other minor party leaders. I've got to talk about who's running the country.
You may not be the opposition to Reform, but you are a competitor. And we read this morning that one of the Conservative Party's big donors, Basim Haidar, donated £700,000 to the Tories under Rishi Sunak, has announced he's giving £1 million to Reform. You must be worried that he's just the first of many.
No, I'm not worried. We are raising money as well in the Conservative Party. The last release showed that we raised more than the Lib Dems, Reform and Labour combined. So we're doing fine on donations. Obviously, we don't want to lose our donors, but we need to make sure that what we are doing is about the public. It's not just about winning elections. What are we winning for? What is the agenda?
I'm not sure I've completely understood where you are on this whole Reform relationship. Let's see if we can get at it another way. Let's remind ourselves of what your colleague Robert Jenrick said recently to a group of Conservative students.
Head towards a general election. where the nightmare scenario is that Keir Starmer sails in through the middle as a result of the two parties being disunited. I don't know about you, but I'm not prepared for that to happen. I want the right to be united. And so one way or another, I'm determined to do that, and to bring this coalition together and make sure that we make solutions.
Now, some people interpret this as disloyalty, a leadership bid and all that, and if you want to tell me that's what you think it is, by all means do so. But I think it sounds more like something pretty obvious, which is an acceptance of reality that as long as there are two parties competing on the centre-right, you are never going to get into Downing Street. Isn't he right?
That's not what he's saying at all. We've had
so
many
what's he
parties.
saying?
Well, look at it this way, Trevor. There are many parties competing on the left: Lib Dems, Greens,
I'm
Labour.
talking about what
let
the
me
right.
finish, if I
I'm
may.
talking about what he said.
Yes,
not...
and yet Labour still won. Just because they're competing parties on one side doesn't mean one party cannot win. What he is talking about, and which I do agree with, is that we need to bring back all those people who left the Conservative Party to go to Reform. We do need to bring that coalition back, just as I want to see the people who left us to go to Lib Dems or to go to Labour coming back. That doesn't mean I want a coalition with Labour or Lib Dems.
Kemi Badenoch, the Leader of the Opposition, thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thank you, Trevor.
Well, the Conservative leader made much of the running this week on the recent Supreme Court ruling about biological sex and the Equality Act. Harriet Harman spoke about that on the latest episode of the Electoral Dysfunction podcast, which looks ahead to the upcoming local and mayoral elections.
I think this is some of the fear that we're hearing, particularly from the trans community, of people talking about rights that they have lost. And the court has said, well, actually, these are, in a sense, rights that you never had. And that's very difficult to hear because it's always been about the application.
People's difficulty in understanding where the law wasn't a thing for 10 years when there wasn't a political controversy. We don't, following the Supreme Court's ruling, need a change in the law. What we need is the consensus rebuilt, and we need sensible guidance.
Back to our panel now, Ian Dale, Carolyn Quinn and Paul Mason. Carolyn, quite robust this morning, Kemi, rather optimistic in view of what the numbers are telling us right now?
Yeah, I mean, the Conservatives will obviously hope that they can have a better night than has been predicted. Downplaying expectations is what the parties tend to do. The Conservatives have got the most to play for, but the most to lose on Thursday because they're starting from a 2021 high, the height of the vaccine bounce, the election win, of course, Boris Johnson at his height of popularity. And so now they have got this problem as well, which you were pressing Kemi Badenoch on this issue of, are you now inevitably going to have to link up with Reform if you want to have any hope of a government on the right? She's insistent, though, that the point is getting those right-wing voters back from Reform, and then the Conservatives can build from there. I think there may be an advantage for the Conservatives in that Reform don't really have a ground force yet. They don't have the infrastructure on the ground. So while they may feel that they have successes on Thursday, can that last? Can it spread?
You say that. I've only had one election leaflet at my house so far, and it's been a Reform one. And also, there are 7 candidates in my ward. There have never been more than 3 before. So again, this makes it all so difficult to predict what will happen.
Yeah, well, we
can see here this really, I think, quite striking thing that Reform is actually leading. I mean, we're way off a general election. This is a national poll. There'll be all sorts of local variations and so on. But it is unusual. And Nigel Farage said to us last time we spoke to him, and he's pretty clear about what his strategy is, win councillors in this local election, and everybody who's in politics knows that actually, by and large, local branches are the core of them are elected councillors.
As the Lib Dems
demonstrated.
From a very, very low
and the
point.
Reform structure, they're basing their new party structure on the Liberal Democrats. I don't know whether the Liberal Democrats should be flattered or appalled by this, but that's what they're doing. And the Liberal Democrats back in the 90s, their national success in the following general elections was built on local government success. And that's what they're trying to replicate here, and Reform are copying them.
Well, but Ian, you know the Conservative Party better than any of us. They are going to have to become clear, really, about at some point, maybe not before the general election, but at some point, what their stance is in relation to Nigel Farage. He's right now saying, I want to destroy the Conservative Party. Well, you can believe that if you want to. But what is the likely outcome here, that at some point the generic slogan, Unite the Right, has to become reality, or they go to war with each other? What's the likelihood?
It doesn't really matter who you are on the right, whether you are of the generic persuasion or the Badenoch persuasion, or maybe someone further to the left on the Conservative Party. In the end, a strong right is more likely to win an election than a shattered right. And obviously, you're going to always ask Kemi Badenoch those questions right up to the next election. She's never going to say, well, of course, I think we might have to consider a coalition with Reform. I mean, clearly that's not going to happen. But what she's got to be careful of is that if she goes too far to sort of tempting Reform voters back, and she should be doing that, she can't lose people to the Liberal Democrats on the other side, because if you look at the main competition for the Conservative Party in the south of England and the southwest, it's the Liberal Democrats.
I haven't got time to come to you before we go to the break, Paul, but I can see you're smiling about this, as most Labour people, I guess, will be. But we'll talk about it again later. Next, we're going to look at whether Donald Trump will walk away from Ukraine if there's no deal to end the war, and what happens if he does.
A show of military might and menace. Why should the West trust you?
Frankly, I don't care whether the West trusts us or not.
Sky News. Get the full story first.
Have a quick word for Sky News. Is the West right? Are you fueling Russia's war machine? American journalist Evan Gershkovich is on trial here, but was first on display.
I'm Ivor Bennett, Sky's Moscow correspondent.
We arrive. A secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle, treating the victims of this bloody war. This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation's future.
This is an actual crime.
They don't care for that.
Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometers away.
So this is a major humanitarian disaster.
jubilation in the streets, while some emotional.
This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party. I'm Neville Lazarus, and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi. Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration. Sky News, get the full story first.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News. Donald Trump met Ukrainian President Zelensky in Rome yesterday as both men attended the late Pope's funeral. The American president has said he thinks a deal to end the war in Ukraine is close, but Russia continues to attack and illegally occupy the country. So could there be a ceasefire, and will the United States really walk away if the talks fail, as the White House has threatened? And what would happen then? Well, earlier I spoke to the former Deputy National Security Advisor under President Obama, Ben Rhodes. Ben, as we speak, the President has issued a statement in which he says essentially that there was no reason for Putin to be shooting missiles into civilian areas, cities and towns over the last few days, and it makes him, Trump, think that maybe he doesn't want to stop the war, he's just tapping me along and has to be dealt with differently through banking or secondary sanctions. What do you make of that?
Well, I mean, I think Trump has determined what was obvious to just about everybody else, which is that as Putin was getting everything that he wanted in his negotiation with the United States, he didn't really have any incentive to end the war. And as Trump was berating Zelensky instead of Putin, Putin could just continue the war on his own terms. And I think what finally happened is it embarrassed Trump. And what you're seeing in those comments is kind of the verbalization of him, tweeting the other day, "Stop, Vladimir." But I think it remains to be seen whether that has any impact. And the banking threat is a threat to kind of go after countries that continue to do trade with Russia. But frankly, I don't think we've seen the sanctions be that effective in really putting an end to the war, certainly. So I'm not sure that threat really escalates much.
So if you're saying Trump has basically caught up with the rest of the world, do you think it's going to change his behavior, the White House's strategy in any way?
Well, thus far, the White House's strategy has basically been to take the Russian positions on things like recognition of territory that they currently occupy, things like no security guarantees or NATO membership for Ukraine, and turn them into U.S. positions, and then blame the Ukrainians for not embracing those positions to end the war. I think this might change the tone a bit, where at least there's some rhetorical pressure in the direction of Russia. I think that the United Kingdom and France and other European countries are going to come in behind that very eagerly to try to demonstrate that, once again, Russia is facing some diplomatic pressure. And look, I think for Putin, it may be that he was testing how much he could do without attracting negative attention from the United States, and he may have overreached with his latest bombardment. But I'm not sure that it fundamentally alters the nature of the negotiations at this point. You still have pretty big gaps between the Ukrainian position and, frankly, the American position as articulated by Trump, which is not that dissimilar from Putin's.
What do you think about the Ukrainians themselves? There's an intriguing picture of Trump and Zelensky kind of head-to-head in Rome, clearly talking pretty seriously. Do you think or what do you think the dynamic of that meeting will have been?
Well, you have to remember that the last time they saw each other, it was an absolute disaster, and Zelensky was essentially thrown out of the White House. And so I think part of the dynamic was just to kind of stabilize a relationship where those two men clearly don't like each other. Whatever they say, it's obvious from their body language and their comments when they're in their respective countries. But I do think that they both have political reasons to demonstrate that they can at least meet in this kind of actually literally sacred setting of St. Peter's and kind of get along enough. Zelensky, I think, needs to calm his own people, who are understandably very nervous about what happens if the United States just withdraws all support. But even Trump, you have to realize, Trevor, like, this is an 80-20 issue in the United States for Americans supporting Ukraine. This is an issue not where Trump is kind of tapped into some broad American view that we don't like the Ukrainians. He's out of step with American public opinion. And frankly, this is one issue where some, not many, Republicans in Congress have been willing to dip their toes into opposition to what Trump's doing. So I think actually this will be welcome, Trump doesn't care what people like me think, but even Republicans in Congress, who he does need for some things, will be heartened to see him kind of making this effort to at least have a constructive meeting with Zelensky. So it served the interest of both of them to do this.
Oh, that's interesting. So how seriously then do you take the language that we heard from both Marco Rubio and Donald Trump earlier on this week, which is a kind of exasperation? If we don't get something to happen in the next few days, we're going to walk away from this. First of all, do you think that was ever possible? And if it were possible, what would walking away really mean?
Well, that's the question, right? Because it's not like the United States can force either Russia or Ukraine to stop fighting. And so the only real substantive walking away that could take place is, sure, they could stop this kind of shuttle diplomacy that they've been engaged in. But the true walking away would be cutting off military and even potentially intelligence support to Ukraine, which would obviously be devastating to the Ukrainians. So the only threat of walking away is a threat to the Ukrainians. What do the Russians care if the United States walks away from a diplomatic process in a war in which Russia thinks it has the upper hand and the United States might be withdrawing support from Ukraine? That's not a threat to Russia. So the only way I can hear that is a threat to the Ukrainians.
When it comes down to it, Ben, are we in a situation where, face saving aside, in the end, both the Americans and I guess Europeans reckon that the Ukrainians are going to have to surrender some land? It was interesting to see the mayor of Kiev, Klitschko, talking about surrendering of land. Are we anywhere near the end game here?
Well, what's been so peculiar about these negotiations, Trevor, is that, yes, at the very end game of the conclusion of the war, if there is a diplomatic settlement to it, Russia is almost certainly going to maintain some of the territory it holds, including Crimea. I think what's been strange in watching how the Trump administration has approached this is the questions are, does Ukraine get credible security guarantees in that context, so it knows that it's actually an end to the war, that Russia's not just going to come back from war in 2 years, 3 years, or 5 years? And is Ukraine kind of forced to recognize the legitimacy of annexation of its own territory, which is obviously politically impossible, I think, to a democratically elected leader like Zelensky right now, and frankly, just not something that they'd want to do. And frankly, they'd want reparations. They want all kinds of things for what Russia's done as the invader. And so, yes, I think anybody who looks at this would recognize that Ukraine has to sacrifice territory at some point. But why are you front-loading all of those concessions now? Why would you not have some phased negotiation where Russia is making concessions as well, that it's going to withdraw from some of that territory, that perhaps there is some reparations process, and that the Ukrainians are getting credible security guarantees and a pathway into Europe? Then you might resolve at an end state that everybody can deal with. And again, I think that's been the flaw, is front-loading all the Russian demands and none of the Ukrainian ones.
The other big test for American diplomacy, of course, is the Middle East. These two issues are, in a sense, interlinked because a lot of this is driven by, if you like, Trump diplomacy. And this is, on the face of it, a new way of doing things for the United States. And it's a conventional view that what Trump's done has brought chaos. And I guess the White House would say, no, it's not chaos. It's just that we are, for the first time, keeping our promises, and you're not used to that. It happens that both things, I guess, could, in theory, be true. But, you know, as an experienced hand and somebody who's been inside the White House and all of that, how are you reading this? Is there method in the madness? Is there a pattern that you can discern?
Yeah, I see two methods to it, Trevor. I mean, the first is the method of everything Trump is doing, domestic and foreign, is completely centralizing power in the White House. The authoritarianism is the point. He controls all the cards. That's what he wants, right? So tariffs, something that is entirely at the whims of the president of the United States, right? These deals run to him. Steve Witkoff is his personal emissary. None of this is running through Marco Rubio. Marco Rubio doesn't speak for Trump, Witkoff does. So he's centralizing everything from immigration to foreign policy to economic policy in his hands. And I think you have to understand that is the pattern. The pattern is what gives him maximum control. And then if you look at the approach to foreign policy, it is so unusual to many of us because it is actually normal and not in the way that I like. It's normal in the sense that the United States is now no different than Russia or China. We're a big country with lots of interest, and we pursue an incredibly transactional approach to the world that can be, you know, on its face, very chaotic, contradictory, hypocritical. But there's a kind of transactionalism at its core. And the world is adjusting to the United States not having enduring commitments, right, to NATO, to allies, to a set of institutions, to an international order. But instead, the United States is just operating as a big power controlled by a strong man that can shift with the winds of that strong man's moods and makes very transactional arrangements.
So no more shining city on the hill, as Reagan would have put it.
No, there's not even a pretense to that. And where the difference between the United States and Russia and China comes in is we're just much bigger. And we have much in terms of our military power, in terms of our reach around the world. And it's just very disorientating, obviously, to our allies, as it should be. I mean, I'm sympathetic to those who are looking at this and saying, I don't understand what's happening. But Trevor, if you talk to people around the world, you know, this is familiar. If you're in the Gulf, right, if you're one of the Gulf Arab states, this is very familiar. This is how business is done. You know, you deal with the strong man, you try to make a transaction. That transaction might only stick for a few months or maybe, if you're lucky, a couple of years. And you just kind of navigate through that. And I don't think that's the right way of doing business. I think it's chaotic and dangerous when a country as big and powerful as the United States starts acting that way. But I do think that that's their approach to the world.
Ben Rhodes, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, Trevor.
In just a moment, we'll take a closer look at those upcoming local elections and what the latest polling shows us.
a secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle, treating the victims of this bloody war. This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation's futures.
This is an actual crime.
They don't care for that.
Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometers away. So this is a major humanitarian disaster.
Welcome back. As we've been discussing, Thursday is election day for many parts of England. 23 of 317 local authorities are being contested, plus 6 mayoralties and a parliamentary by-election in Runcorn and Helsby. This is where the parties start from. The Conservatives had a great night when these were last fought 4 years ago. They're defending nearly 1,000 seats and control of 16 councils. Reform was in its infancy then, so it could be a tough night for the Tories. Here's where those councils are, a sea of Tory blue, that solitary pocket of Labour red being Doncaster. But look how much has changed since then. The Conservatives won 40% of the vote nationally, but in a poll for Sky this week, that had halved. Labour were on 30% last time. The poll now puts them on 23%. And Reform were grouped into that other category last time. But this time, they led this week's poll. And for the first time ever, it's Reform fielding the most candidates, closely followed by the Conservatives and Labour. Right, I can speak now to the pollster I may say I trust most in this country, Peter Kellner. Peter, let's start with why it matters. What's at stake on Thursday?
Two things are at stake, Trevor. Firstly, who controls these counties up and down England? As you showed, the Tories won the great majority of them last time. They're expected to lose most of those. So who will govern? To the people who live in those counties, the government of those counties may well change. And indeed, we may start seeing Conservative Reform coalitions locally, which will have a big national effect. But the second big thing is what the parties will be looking out for is the national story that emerges. And you showed the poll last week nationally. Now, what tends to happen in local elections is the big parties do a bit worse than their poll rating, and the smaller parties do better than their poll rating. Classically, the Liberal Democrats have traditionally won 5 or 10% more of the vote in council elections than in national elections. So when you look at where the parties are now, you see Labour 23, Conservatives 20. It could well be that together they'll have under 40%, more than the vote nationally. More than 60% going to Reform, Lib Dems, Greens and Independents, others. And that is really new in British politics. It takes us into a new space, slightly concealed by the fact that we have a voting system which pushes back against multi-party politics.
I want to come back to that issue of the Labour-Tory vote, but just on the local thing, I think you've said elsewhere that you expect to see more councils in no overall control, i.e. coalitions.
Well, that's right. And I think in most of them, because we're looking at what is normally Tory England, because Scotland isn't voting, Wales isn't voting, the big English cities aren't voting, something that's being talked about a lot, including in this weekend's papers, what might Tories and Reform do approaching the next general election, which is probably 4 years away? Well, in a number of counties, they're going to face this in a few weeks' time, indeed a few days' time, because I suspect a lot of these traditionally Tory counties, there will be a majority for Conservative and Reform, but not for either of them individually. What do they then do? Because nationally we're told, no deal, we'll fight each other, no relationship whatsoever. But in practice, what will they do at local council level? So the Tory Reform drama after next Thursday will move to a lot of county halls.
Well, the Conservative Party leader, Kemi Badenoch, has just been saying to me that she's, relatively speaking, relaxed about that. What do you if we see a lot of these coalitions, what do you think that means for politics more generally? Will people get used to it, or will it just become vociferous and with lots of arguments that end up essentially driving those parties further apart?
One of the curious things is if you take a very long view of British politics, it's been essentially stable, conservative Labour dominance for 100 years, just over 100 years. And the occasional times when there have been by-elections or the birth of the SDP in the 1980s under Roy Jenkins, you had UKIP coming through suddenly in European elections in particular. So the question is it different this time? Is it like another of these minor party surges which will subside when we get to the serious business of choosing a government? Or has it changed? I think it has changed because this has not happened suddenly. Over years and years and years, we've seen the Tory plus Labour vote gradually come down. A few exceptions, a few sort of bumps on the way, but it's been coming down. And I think there's a reason for that, which is when I was growing up, when you and I were growing up, we're of an age to remember when politics was essentially middle-class Conservative, working-class Labour. It was about politics, it was about ideology, it was about identity, it was about social class. That's all gone. The economy's changed, identities have changed, far fewer people are attached to any one party, and this has allowed other parties to come through. It may go down a bit at the next election, but I think we are into a long period of multi-party politics.
Just very briefly, Peter, who's got most to worry about this week?
The Conservatives, because it is, I'm not saying it will happen, it's perfectly possible. Not only will they lose most or even all of their councils, but they could, when we get the projection of the national vote, they could come out fourth with possibly, here's the possibility that will set us all chatting away next weekend for hours on end. It could be national vote, Reform first, Lib Dem second, Labour third, Conservative fourth. I'm not saying that will happen, but it's possible.
You heard it here first. Thank you so much, Peter. Watch next week. But anyway, keep watching this week, because in just a moment, we'll hear once again from our panel.
The Yazidis are a very small religious group, and in 2014, ISIS seemed to have set about their destruction.
Chilling reports describe ISIL militants rounding up families, conducting mass executions, and enslaving Yazidi women.
Some Yazidi survivors refused to be beaten by ISIS. But the suffering of the Yazidis is far from over. 10 years of darkness on Sky News.
I'm James Matthews, and I'm Sky's US correspondent, based here in Washington, D.C. Do you fear a fourth indictment? Does your government owe an apology to the British home children?
Great to see you.
Does your government owe them an apology? The fact that they were intercepted, does that indicate a military weakness on the part of Iran?
No.
Free, wherever you get your news. There's no doubting the strength of this hurricane as it roars through. You can feel a devastating power. It had been a difficult night in a deadly storm.
Bang, bang. You can hear it hitting the windows.
Our houses are okay.
It's depressing.
As bad as all of this is, it could have been much worse. Today, this land they call sacred is at the heart of America's electric car revolution.
To me, it's a sacred ground.
The white gold rush is a race that Biden doesn't want to lose. I've covered some of the biggest stories in the world. Donald Trump, 45th President of the United States, it would appear is about to learn his fate.
Escort coming out!
San Quentin houses America's largest death row. They rarely allow cameras onto the condemned block.
James Matthews, Sky News. I want to be treated equally like everyone else. It's one step closer to getting out, to getting off death row.
Sky News. Get the full story first. Mr. Trump, James Matthews from Sky News.
Hey, James.
Are you diminished by claims that you're a racist?
Question?
Mr. Musk, has your ignorance and ego cost Ukrainian lives? Vladimir Putin calls you outstanding. What do you call him, sir?
He's from Sky News. He's from Sky News. He's entitled to ask me questions.
Jubilation in the streets, while some emotional. This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party. I'm Neville Lazarus, and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi. Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration. Sky News, get the full story first.
A show of military might and menace. Why should the West trust you?
Frankly, I don't care whether the West trusts us or not.
Sky News, get the full story first. Have a quick word for Sky News. Is the West right? Are you fueling Russia's war machine? American journalist Evan Gershkovich is on trial here, but was first on display. I'm Ivor Bennett, Sky's Moscow correspondent.
Back to our panel, Ian Dale, Carolyn Quinn and Paul Mason. Paul, just very briefly, before we talk about local elections, I thought Ben Rhodes' point that Trump's diplomacy, essentially what he said, a big power controlled by a strong man, which is familiar from other parts of the world, it seems strange to us because it's not the way the Americans have done things, but it's true for pretty much everybody else.
I think he wasn't just saying that, he was saying that the American government is being centralised. So immigration control, economic. I mean, Trump even tried to take over the central bank and then backed off. I think what we're dealing with the Trump administration is actually not a strong man. We're dealing with a man who is trying to be strong, but you can't run the US administration like that. And for us, our government, Starmer, Peter Mandelson, the ambassador, are having to basically work overtime to kind of herd cats, because it is a bit of a cat-herded government. And so far, I think I started off by saying this, you've got to pay tribute to them, because we are getting results out of the Americans. I mean, that picture in the Vatican of a completely consensual, almost, the body language is... Zelensky is a young man in charge of 41 million nations at war, and Trump's sitting there slumped listening to him. Well, that's how you handle Trump. And I think that whether he's centralised or whether there's divisions in the administration, we've got to hand it to our government that we are so far handling it okay.
But the thing with Donald Trump, you don't know. He might not be slumped tomorrow. He might be upright and saying something completely different. So he loves the fanfare of the deal. He loves the idea of being the deal maker rather than the long-term outcome. And, I mean, it's been said many times, hasn't it, that he would drop this deal if it doesn't happen quickly enough and he gets bored and he sort of lumbers off. It's very, very far from the Reaganite idea of the city on a hill. And, we've now got to learn to view the US in a very, very different way. I'd love to think there was some great strategy behind it, but I don't know if there is.
Well, it keeps us in work. Let's come back to domestic politics. Ian, Kevin Badenoch was pretty bullish and so on, but Peter Kellner was pretty clear. Reform is advancing here. Bit of relief for Labour, and he suggested that Tories could end up fourth.
Well, I think anything is possible. It depends. Do you mean by vote share or seats or what?
Translated into a national vote share.
This would not be unprecedented. In 2022, you may remember, in the European elections, the Conservatives got 9%.
That's true.
So we like to think that both of the main parties have a base core support of 20-25%. That's what we've traditionally thought. But that's being eroded now, I think, in all parties.
We can't rely on the past performance, can we now, it seems?
I wonder what turnout's going to be like as well, because conventionally it's very, very low in local elections. So that could lead to some quirky results. Whether there'll be tactical voting, who knows? But I think Kemi Badenoch was making it quite clear to you earlier, as you pointed out with Peter, that on a national level, it's a no-go area for talking about reform and Conservative deals. On a local level, perhaps, if circumstances dictate, clever councillors can be left to sort it out between themselves, she said.
And there is a crumb of comfort for the Conservatives, because since the general election, they've actually gained 61 seats in local councils, Reform 15...
Labour by-elections.
Yeah, by-elections. Labour down 40 and the Lib Dems up 3. So, I mean, I don't know whether that has any relevance whatsoever, but it's interesting nonetheless.
I mean, let's put some substance into this. I praise Kemi Badenoch for her insistence that she will not form a national coalition with Farage. And the reason for that is the content of what that coalition would be. Farage is Trump's man in British politics. Farage is Putin's man in British politics.
No, he's not.
And Kemi Badenoch is absolutely right to do what many European politicians have done, which is to erect a firewall against the far right. That's what we should be doing. Now, the problem the Tories...
They did that in France and Germany. And,
well, look, I think they can still do it.
And they became more popular.
That's what we continue to need to do. On my side of politics, what we need to do is find common ground with Lib Dems, Greens and the rest to form a bloc against this threat.
Sorry, you can't equate Farage with Le Pen or the AfD in Germany. And the problem Kemi Badenoch might well have is if it's a choice of another 4 years of a Labour government or 4 years of a Reform Conservative government, which is she really going to pick?
You tell me.
Well, I would have thought she'd go for the latter, even if she said right up until the election, we won't do a deal with Reform. As long as the Conservatives get far more seats and far more votes, they would be in the driving seat. So any of the sort of slightly weird policies that Reform have could be jettisoned.
We will know the truth this time next week. I'll be back next Sunday. Been good to be with you. See you next week.
Jubilation in the streets, while some emotional.
This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party.
I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi. Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration. Sky News, get the full story first.